Hello everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar. My name is Mark Kardashov, and today we are going to learn how to develop test automation for mobile applications. Marat is one of our senior solution architects here in TestProject, and he will take it from here. So, Marat.
Yes, thank you, Mark. Hello, everyone. And as Mark said, today we are going to talk about Appium and how to implement the page object model using Appium. But first, in order to start, I'm assuming that you already have Appium installed. And if not, you can just download it from the Appium website. It's completely free and is supported by the community. And before you can actually start developing your automation tests, you have to set up the Appium server. You have to connect a device and have an application that you are going to test. We are going to use Java as the language to create this test automation. But as you know, Appium has the Selenium syntax. It allows you to create mobile tests for Android and iOS using the same client library. And you can choose eventually any programming language to implement your tests. So, as I was saying, we are going to demonstrate how to create an automated test for an Android application. And in order to perform the automation actions, how Appium does it is that actually it interacts with different application components, which are basically an element. And first, in order to create those actions, we have to map those elements so that they can be found and we can invoke any actions on them. And what we are going to do, we are going to develop two tests, one for a successful login to the demo application that I'm about to show you, and one which is an unsuccessful login, which basically makes this test one a positive test and one a negative test. So, as I was saying, I'm going to have a look at a very simple Android application that has been developed specifically for the purposes of the demonstration. This application has a full name field, it has a password field, and a login button. We are going to create an automated test that is going to type the full name, type a password, and then click the login button. First time it will do is with a correct password. And for the negative test, it will input the wrong password. But as I was saying, in order to do these things, first we have to identify the elements that our test is going to interact with. So you can either look at the source code of the application, and you can infer that this particular field for the full name has an ID of name, and this field has an ID of password. Or you can use any other tool that allows you to inspect the mobile application layout and DOM in order to identify the elements. I would like to show you how we are doing this using the TestProject recorder and SPY. As you can see, this is the application that I was showing you before. It is currently running on my device. And if I will move my mouse cursor to one of the elements and highlight it, I can see that in this side menu, I have a list of all the attributes for the particular element. Specifically, I have the resource ID, which is considered to be unique and is named name. And I can check if this location strategy is good enough to create my automated test. So I will just click this Find Element button and evaluate, and you will see that the element is being highlighted. Same for the password. I can see that it has a unique resource ID called password, and I can check if using this location strategy is sufficient. As you can see, the element is being highlighted, and what I can do, I can use these criteria to find the elements in the application. So, as I was saying, we're going to create our tests using the IntelliJ IDEA IDE and Appium, and the test will be written using Java. What we have here is basically a class with a main method that will be invoked when this class will be executed. And first thing to do is to configure the capabilities required in order to test the application. So we're creating an Android capabilities, saying that the platform is Android. We are specifying the device that is going to be used in order to run the application. We are configuring the application package name and activity that are listed as constant variables in this class. Finally, when all these capabilities are configured, we can create an instance of an Android driver that is listening on this URL when an Appium server has been started, and provide these capabilities in order to initialize an Android automation session. Once the session has been initialized, we can use this driver in order to invoke the different actions that are required in order to automate our application. So first thing to do, we would like to reset the application to make sure that we discard any existing state if the application is currently open. Then we will try to find an element by an ID login. But as I was saying before, first we have to identify that this element is indeed exists on the DOM. So as you can see, this login button, its unique ID is actually a login. And what can I do is that I can inspect this using the TestProject recordings by copy this ID and use it in my test. Appium works in a way that when it fails to perform an action, it will throw an exception. And developers can either surround the code that is supposed to throw an exception using a try and catch block, and then decide how to handle it, or just fail the test, as it will happen here when exception is thrown. So this line here is searching for an element by ID login, and if the element is not there, it will throw an exception and fail the test. Next, what we have is an attempt to find an element by class name, which is keyboard. We're doing it only for the demonstration purposes, so that eventually when this test is executed, we'll see a full screen of the application, and the keyboard will not interfere with other elements. This is not required for the automation of the test. Next, what we have is we are searching for an element by an ID name. And as I was showing you before, I know that this element is supposed to exist here because this element has an ID name. I copy this value and type it here in order to find the element, and then I can type the text that I would like to appear in the text view. We are doing the same for password. We are searching for it and then sending the password, which is also a constant variable. And the password is 13345, which is actually the right password for this demo application. Any other password will not be accepted, and user will not be transferred to the authorized area. Finally, we found the login button and click it. After the button has been clicked and the password will be correct, user will be transferred to the authorized area. The authorized area will show the user a greetings and a profile page. I would like to demonstrate how it's going to happen by executing the recorded test that I've created using the TestProject platform. As you can see, application is being resetted. Then the information that I have supplied is entered, and eventually the authorized area is being presented. This label here, which is a concatenation on the word hello and the previous full name that I just entered, has a unique ID of greetings. And in order to determine that the login sequence worked correctly, I will be searching for this element, trying to find it, assuming that if it is there and it is displayed, the test has completed successfully. In case that the greetings will not be displayed, as I was saying before, an exception will be thrown, and this line here will never be printed. Finally, when the test is over, I would like to close the Appium session to release the resources and close the application. Now, I'm going to show you the same test, but with different outcome. The reason for the different outcome, as I was saying, is because in this case, we entered the right password, which is 12345, and the application will accept it. But in case of the negative test here, which you can see is basically almost identical to the previous one, the success criteria is different. Once the login button has been clicked, and all this code is the same until this point to the previous test, we would like to check if the login button is still displayed. And indeed, it will be displayed, because if the password is incorrect, user will not be transferred to the profile page, and he will stay on the login page. And an error will appear that the password is incorrect. So if the login button will still be there after it has been clicked, it means that the login failed. And because this is a negative test, we would like to claim that this test has been completed successfully. As you can see, the initial part of the tests, including the session initialization and the driver initialization, is identical to the positive one. The only difference is in the success criteria. So moving forward from this point, after showing you the tests, I would like to ask the question, what can go wrong? Basically, as I was saying, we are seeing a mix of test logic and UI actions. And as you can see in this code snippet, we are looking for an element, we're trying to understand if it is displayed or not, and we are inferring a conclusion about the test completion, whether it was completed successfully or failed. This couple design is very difficult for maintenance. Not only because you might be looking for the same element multiple times, but also it creates a code redundancy that we just saw. Both of the tests share the same code base, but doing the same things. And the only difference is the outcome. And this creates an unnecessary complexity, because in this single line, we are also looking for an UI element to create a particular UI state in order to achieve a particular situation in which can we infer the test outcome. So in order to resolve this situation and to come with a better method to implement these Appium tests, what we are going to do, we are actually going to introduce the main subject of this webinar, the page object model. The page object model is basically a design pattern that is intended to simplify things and to create a scalable solution for your test automation. I'm going to show you the same tests that has been implemented using this pattern. but serve the same purpose. They're also entering information in the login page, trying to reach the authorized area. So going back to my IDE, I would like to show you this part of code. As you can see, the capabilities part stays the same. We are still testing an Android application on a particular device, and we are still initializing an Android driver. But in this case, you will notice that we have something called login page. Login page is a new class that has been created in order to encapsulate the UI actions that we are performing on the screen. And if I will show you the class itself, you will see that we have a few things here that needs to be explained. First of all, the page needs a driver. It needs a driver because only the driver can actually search and initialize the elements. Also, it has these fields. A field for the name element, the password element, which are all Android elements. In order to initialize those fields and to actually find the element itself, these fields are annotated with the Android find by annotation. In order to find the name element, we have to use the location strategy of ID with the value name, the same as we used to do in the previous test. But this time, it is much more convenient to see what elements are being used on this page, because as I was saying, each element is a separate field annotated by a clear definition of how it should be searched. In order to initialize the elements, when the page is created, this line should be invoked. The page factory receives an Appium field decorator, which receives a driver in order to initialize those elements and find them in the application. Next, after you have these elements listed and you have created your objects repository, what you can do is you can go back to your test, and after the page has been initialized, you can create a convenience method that no longer has to deal with elements to make sure that it's currently being displayed. So in this case, if the page is not displayed, we would like to return from the test and never get to the line saying the test has been completed successfully. Behind the scenes, the isDisplayed is utilizing the login element that we mapped here and checks if the isDisplayed is true. If the element is not there, it will still throw an exception. So the test, as I was saying, will never get to the test completed successfully printout and will fail at this point. But look how clean it is now. Instead of searching for an UI element and then inferring some kind of a conclusion, we're operating with convenience methods of the page. And the page itself implements the whole logic behind UI element searching and operating. The test continues as the previous test, performing the same actions, logging in with a particular user and the password, which in this case is a correct password, and then expects the profile page to be displayed. So the profile page is also initialized, and the isDisplayed of the profile page is searching for the greetings element, this very same element that we were searching before in order to determine that the profile page is being displayed. But now, as I was saying, it is encapsulated in a convenience method, and user no longer have to deal with searching for elements. He can infer that if it is displayed, he can move forward to the test completed successfully printout. And now the test uses the page object model. The idea behind the page object model is that we have a dedicated class listing all the elements of the screen that we are talking about and a convenience methods to operate with those elements. Since we created these pages, we no longer have to search for these elements as part of our test. And our negative test will just utilize the same pages invoking the same functions, creating an object-oriented encapsulation for the UI automation part. In this case of the negative login test, it is going to fail if the login page will not be displayed after the login. So in case that we will enter a wrong password, it will fail because it will never get the profile page. I would like to go back to the presentation and try to address a few items that we currently discussed. So as I was saying, in order to implement the page object model, we have to write the find by annotations in the page, which describe how to find the elements. The find by annotation allows the internal mechanism to search for the element and populate the elements in the fields. We are using the same techniques as we are using for the simple Appium tests to identify the elements and create page objects based on these elements. And also, we are using the page object factory, as I have shown here, to initialize those elements so that they can be used after they were found on the DOM. Here, you can see a simple comparison of how the plain Appium test was developed and how the page object model test looks like. Before, we had everything combined together. We were searching for an element and then inferring the test success criteria. But now we have an element definition. We also have a convenience method and a convenience method invocation from the test. These two are part of the page. This one is part of the test. So the test is much cleaner. And at this point, it leads me to the next slide, where I would like to compare and answer the problems that we discussed earlier of what can go wrong. So we say that there's a mix of test logic and UI actions when you are not using the page object model. But when you do, you are creating a separation of duties, and you are actually using the object-oriented programming concepts when you divide things into different classes so that the pages are a separate class. You no longer have the couple design. You are decoupling objects library from the decision taking in tests, and this way you can utilize the same UI actions to infer different success criteria. It is easier to maintenance because you have only one authority to manage the page elements and UI actions. And you no longer have the code redundancy in the tests because you're no longer using the find element calls in order to create the UI manipulations. You are using the convenience methods of the page classes. And of course, you don't have the unnecessary complexity. The code becomes self-explanatory thanks to the find by annotations. And it is much easier to maintain for the long run when you have to change something. For example, the search locators. So what we could see so far, I just want to summarize, is a plain test performing a login sequence and uses the right password, and a negative test that uses a different password, which will eventually fail. And we saw the same test, which is now using the page object model, invoking the convenience methods, and the negative test that provides a wrong password. It makes the test to fail. At this point, we can clearly see that the page object model is very beneficial when you are creating complex automation tests, because you can divide your UI actions and your logical actions into separate entities. And you can also encapsulate the UI actions and aggregate them under a specific page. Any questions that you have at this point and you would like to ask before I move next to the other subjects that you would like to discuss at this webinar? All right. So if you do, don't hesitate to write them down in the chat, and we'll definitely address them. And I'm currently moving forward to this slide, and I would like you, Mark, to step in and give us a brief introduction about this one.
Yeah, thank you, Murat, for your detailed explanation about Appium and the advantages of using the page object model when you're developing your test automation. Now let's talk a little bit about how we can take it to the next level by using a TestProject framework. Basically, in this example, we're going to use TestProject in order to execute and run the test automation. It can be executed on multiple devices and multiple agents across your organizations. We're going to see how we can use TestProject framework in terms of dashboards and reports, and how we can help with test automation execution and distributed execution across multiple devices and across multiple agents in your organization. Marat?
Yes, thank you, Mark. So, as Mark was saying, basically, we need to package the test that we just created so it can be executed on TestProject. It will still be the same 100% Appium test. And the only thing that needs to be done is adding a few tiny things that will allow us to execute it on the TestProject platform. So we have prepared the same test, and we wrapped it in the execute method. As you can see, the test stays the same. We still reset the application. We have the login page. We are using it in order to log in using some credentials. And afterwards, we even fill in the profile page. But the only difference here is that, as I was saying, this whole code is wrapped in an execute method. And instead of creating a driver, what we are doing here is we are using the getDriver method on the helper that is being provided to the execute method. We are implementing this execute method because we are implementing an interface called Android Test. This is the way that when you are using TestProject SDK, it should be working, so that eventually the selection of the device and the application that comes from the TestProject platform UI that I will show you in a moment will be available during the execution. One more important thing to mention is that in previous tests, we had all the information hard-coded in the test, but here we have those fields that will be populated with information that the user provides and allow us a data-driven execution. So in order to summarize, I just want to say that we have 3 tests here. One of them is almost identical to the test that we saw before, besides this part, which allows data-driven execution. Another one, you know what? We will talk about it in a moment. So as I was saying, in order to allow the execution on TestProject, you have to implement the interface, and you have to put all of your code into the execute method. Let's go over the code and see again what are the differences. So as I was saying, the initialization of the driver that we used to do before is no longer necessary because we are going to specify the device and the application from the TestProject UI. Afterwards, we still reset the application, we initialize the login page, and we would like to know if the login page is displayed. But in this case, if the login page is not displayed, either it will throw an exception, or we can always return enum from our test. So in this case, we will return the failed enum, which will indicate to the TestProject platform that the test has failed. The same thing goes for other checks, such as the profile page displayed, or when the profile page is updated, if it is saved or not. This is the only difference between the previous code that we just saw, which is pure Appium, and the TestProject package. After this code is completed, we can create a jar file which has one or more tests. In this particular case, there are 3 tests in the jar file, and we can package it. Once it is packaged, we can upload the jar file to the TestProject platform. So let me show how this should be done. We can exit this recorder here, and we can open the test packages section. We are going to create an Android demo test. Which will be an Android test. But we have to specify what is the application that we are going to invoke the automation on. And in order to do this, we will add a new application. So I have my Android device connected. I will just select it from the list. And then I will expand the application section to get a list of the applications that are currently installed on my device. In this case, this is the TestProject demo application. Since this application with the name already exists, I can just add this suffix here, and the application will be created. I could do the same using an APK file of the application that I could upload, and this information would be inferred from the APK file. But here I selected a pre-installed application, and as I said, we are going to create an Android demo test based on the jar file that I have compiled before for the TestProject demo application. And now we have to upload the jar file. Here we go. After I upload, I get a summary of the contents. We have 3 tests there. One of them is the demo test that I just showed you. And when this wizard finishes, I will have a test package called Android demo with 3 tests inside. And I can easily execute the first one called demo test. So the system will ask me what is the device that I would like to use, and this is the physical device that is currently attached to my computer. I will just leave it selected. And now I will be presented with a screen where I can supply different values for the parameterized execution. Later, I will show you how to create a data-driven execution based on a CSV file. But in this particular case, I'm just going to type in some information with the right password. And execute it. I will show you how it works. We will be able to see the screen of the device. The test will be invoked. I think that I didn't compile the jar. Give me a second here, guys. I'll compile it again. And I will just try to upload it here. It looks identical, so I'll just delete it. So here we can see how the test is being executed. The application is being resetted because this is the first step. Then the information I just entered is being provided, and then it completes the profile and saves it. Since the profile saved label appears, it assumes that the test has been successful, and eventually we can see an execution report of this test here. As passed. So going back to the presentation that we just talked about, we have packaged a test, the same test that we created for Appium using the same code for TestProject. We executed the test on the TestProject platform, and we can now see a dashboard which provides us with a detailed report for the test. The only thing here is that besides that the test has passed, we don't know much about this test. So before we move forward, I would like to enhance this test just a little bit so that we can see test steps in this right section. And in order to do so, I would like to introduce you to a few more things that the TestProject SDK provides. Please pay attention to these lines here. It is the same test. We're using the login page. We are performing the login using the name and password and completing the profile. But after every meaningful step, we are reporting something to the platform so that eventually we can see in case of failure and even in case of success, how the automation behaves. So after a successful login, if the login page is displayed, we'll report a step that will launch the TestProject demo application. After the login, we will report a step with an indication which name and password were used. And after we have completed the profile, we'll also assert a completion. So if I will execute this step here, this test here, sorry, and provide a little bit more interesting information. We will see that after the execution has been completed, we have 3 more new steps in the report. So let's just wait for it to finish. We are currently performing a sort of data-driven execution. And in a moment, I will be showing you how to do this with an external CSV file. But as I was saying, after the execution has been completed, we can see in the report that we got 3 steps reported. And as I was saying, the information that we provided, logged in, and the credentials that I used. To enhance it even more, and to provide the person who executes these tests with default values, we have this third test here, and we have this test parameter annotation with the default value. So when I will be executing this test, instead of providing the values myself, I can just leave the default values that appear here because they were configured in the code. But as I was saying, I would like to create an external data source that we will use in order to execute this test. And in order to do so, I will download a CSV template. And I will just enter a few items here. And in this case, for the second person, I'm not going to use the right password. I'm going to use a wrong password. After I save this CSV file, what I have to do is to upload the CSV file to the TestProject platform. So I will expand the data sources section, add a file called demo app data source. And after a data source has been created, I can execute this test here, even the one that does not have default values, using the data source provided. And when it is executed, we will be able to track the execution from this view, or we can go to the job monitor. Oh, sorry. We'll be going to the job monitor in a moment. I'm sorry, guys. I'm just rushing ahead of time. Yeah, and as I was saying, it will provide the information that I have supplied through the CSV file. Okay, so this is the first iteration for the first person called name team, and the second one then will type in a wrong password, and because he will type a wrong password, the test will fail, and we will be able to see a report with information about this test. Let's give it a moment to finish. And I will just close this screen. So as you can see, in this case, the test has failed. The first iteration went through. Okay, we don't have steps because the test does not have any steps. We could have steps, and we could know which step failed if we would execute a different test. And we have the second iteration that failed because the password was wrong. So if I will execute the test with steps, we would see that the third step failed because it didn't pass the login page. But we'll do this in a moment. And I would like to show you how can we move forward and allow the team's collaboration and the devices grid that we were talking about. So in order to do so, what we should be doing is actually creating a job. Let's name it an Android demo, which will be a mobile job, and it will be executed on my agent. And we will select a device. We can select multiple devices in case they are connected. Fortunately, I have only one right now. And they will be executed one after another. This job can be either executed on demand, or we can schedule it to be executed at some particular time. We can also schedule it to be executed on a recurrent basis, for example, every day. And this will allow a nightly execution, for example. So in this case, we'll just leave it on demand. And we have a new job with 0 tests inside. We are going to place two tests inside of it. And once the tests are there, we can specify which data source these tests will use. After everything is done, we can execute this job. And these tests inside the job will be executed in the order. After the execution has started, I can open the job monitor screen. I can see that this test is currently being executed. And I can also view the device where they are being executed in order to inspect how the execution progresses. So we have team, the right password. Everything should work well for him. And we got the other person, then, who types the wrong password. Since he types the wrong password, the test will fail. And if you remember, the first test in this case is the test that reports steps. In a moment, we will see a report of this job with the steps reports, where we have all the required information that we need in order to infer why the failure occurred. This is the second test in the job that is currently being executed, the one that didn't have any reports. We'll just wait until it finishes. And once it finishes, the job report for these two tests will be created. As I was saying, this is a data-driven executing job. It is using a CSV file for the execution. And now it executes the second test that will fail because of the broken data that has been supplied, so that you can see in the report that the test has failed. You can notice that the job has failed. If you go to the report section, now we have a job report which failed. The first iteration of the first test went through successfully. We can even see that the test has been completed successfully, not only its steps. And the second iteration failed. The only step that has been successfully commenced is launching the application, but it never went beyond this first step. It never got to the profile page. The second test also failed. The first iteration went through, we have no reports, and the second iteration failed. So this is the way to scale your automation on different devices with different tests on different computers, on different agents where these devices are connected. Last thing to show on this matter is actually the test. Let me see if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, with defaults. Just a moment. I wanted to show you that in case of the demo test with defaults, I set in the reporting step this parameter, allowing me to take a screenshot in any case, in case of a success and also in case of failure. So when this is the case, I can see a screenshot of the device that has been taken immediately after the step execution. This is very convenient when you have failures and you have step reports to understand, besides the textual message of the failure, you can inspect what went wrong. And of course, this is also a part of the whole reporting and the results dashboards that TestProject platform provides. Going back to the presentation, I think that it is time to summarize what we just saw. So we started with implementing a pure Appium test, which is performing a login sequence on a demo application that has been developed for this session, and a negative test that performing the same sequence with the wrong password and fails because it stays on the login page. Then we implemented the page object model to simplify the code, remove redundancy, decouple, and to make it maintainable for the long run. We also had a positive test and a negative test with the same logic as the first two. Then I showed you how to package your tests for the TestProject platform, how to execute them there, how to see the execution progress, how to scale your tests by creating jobs and combining different tests in the same job on different devices, and potentially on different computers that can reside in laboratories or remotely. In this particular case, we were using a local device we were using the TestProject recorder and spy in order to identify the elements and to create the automation tests, and then to execute them on the local computer and the local Android device. And I think that at this point, we have covered most of the material that we would like to discuss today. Anything that I missed, guys? Anyone has any questions at this point? Something that you would like to ask? Something which was not clear?
Hi, Marat. Rajesh from this side. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can, Rajesh. Hello.
Yeah. Thanks for the presentation. It was really nice, and I get some introduction to the test project with Appium. My first question is to run the Appium test using TestProject. Do I need to open Appium server? I mean, it should be up and running, or only the test agent which TestProject has can serve the purpose?
It's an excellent question, Rajesh. Our TestProject agent combines inside of it everything you need for the automation to work. We have an Appium server that we ship with the installation of the agent. We have all the configuration required and all the dependencies. So you no longer have to install anything. And when you are developing using the TestProject SDK, you don't have to use the Appium client libraries. You can just reference our SDK and start working.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I believe you have a Maven dependency for the SDK?
We currently ship our SDK as a jar file, which is available for a download through our website. It is possible that in the near future, we will also have a main repository.
Okay.
And you will be able to download it from there.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. And the next, I think, the last questions I would like to ask, as Appium works on API level for Android, so for the test project, for which version of Android does it support? So does it support from 4.4 or it supports only the higher version?
We are currently using the UI Automator 2 behind the hood. So we are talking about KitKat, which is 4.4 and upwards. You can still utilize lower versions using Selendroid. And we can definitely show you how to do this, but it will be probably a little bit more complex for the scope of this conversation.
Not now. I was just curious whether it supports the lower version or not.
Yeah, okay. we are still using Appium behind the hood, so.
Okay, Thanks, Marat. I'll get back to you if I have more questions through email to Karen. Thanks.
Of course, thank you. Anyone else that have any questions about the contents that were provided? Mark, anything that you would like to add from your side or to emphasize?
No, Marat, thank you. Actually, it was a great presentation. Thank you very much. Very informative. Just to tell thank you to everyone who joined this webinar, and we are going to share this video and the content of the presentation and the code snippets in our blog, and we are going to send to you all the relevant links to the video and to the blog. And as you probably know, TestProject is free to use, so you can go and ask an invite and download it and use it. And in case you will have any questions regarding page object or Appium or how to utilize page object for using test automation, we will also send you contact details that you will be able to send us an email, and we will gladly address those questions for you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Mark.
Everyone.
Yeah, thanks everyone, and thank you for joining us today.
See you in the next webinar.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.